Well, folks, in today's video, we're going to be assembling this Canadian National GE-9 locomotive from Athern. So this is an engine I picked up at the Armprior train show. I got this thing ridiculously cheap. It was $15, and the reason it's so cheap is because it's not really assembled. It doesn't have any handrails. The shell pops off. You can see there's none of the work on the sides there. But this thing came with a lot of extra parts. There's tons of parts in the box. And it's an old Athern blue box, so it's probably going to run right out of the box. So we'll find out and, yeah, see if we can get a working engine. Let's test this thing, because I don't even know if it works. Alright, moment of truth. Well, it runs, but my god, that's really rough. Okay, so that's certainly going to need some work before we can even start working on the shell, so let's see if we can correct some of the problems this thing has. We're going to see if we can sort out some of the problems. One thing I can already tell which is wrong is somebody's shoved this electrical contact under there. It should be up there like so. And that's pretty free. It's very critical that these are able to turn freely. Because if they don't, your locomotive will derail when it comes into a corner. There was one time I saw a coupling box had been installed backwards and it was a bit longer on one side than the other, and it was jamming the truck on one of my switcher engines, and every time it would try to corner, it would derail. So always make sure that these are completely mobile. Anyway, I can see we've got a very dirty commutator, so that's a problem. This thing probably hasn't been lubricated in a long time, so maybe we should try lubricating it. We'll just get a kind of tool there and take that out. And why don't we take them both off at the same time, because why not? That is jammed, you see? That should be able to turn on the top of the gear. So that one's definitely no good. Now let's see the status of this one. Also doesn't move. So these trucks are both basically seized. Okay, yeah, that's ridiculous. See how the tool actually bends? This should be effortless. So we certainly need to take this apart and clean it. We've got a clip on both sides in this case. Doesn't seem to be too bad. Weird. Okay, so here's a problem. The little square bearings are not turning freely on all sides. I think this was an Athern kit and somebody might have basically over-tightened these a little. So if we just pull them out just a tiny bit, and we now check the bearing turns freely. So that was probably what was causing the problem, because the same problem is on all three other wheels, and it's probably what's going on in the other truck. So we'll lubricate those, we'll put the whole thing back together, and hopefully the problems will go away. Alright, so we've got all the gears oiled. Now we will begin reassembling this. And we'll just gently pop each of the wheel sets in. This is tricky. Fixed. Now got the second truck completely disassembled, and we're now in the process of lubricating it. Now, a tip for people who have never lubricated a locomotive before, a little goes a long way. On each pivot, you just want to put a slick of very thin oil. And for gears, you don't need grease, you just need oil. And you put a tiny, tiny little, like, line, basically, little line, and you put each of the gears over that, and they'll spread it around. And you don't want to put any more, as tempting as it may be, because it will actually increase the amount of strain on the motor, and ultimately it won't increase performance, it will decrease performance. So that's what you want to aim for, basically. I've now got the second truck back together and it's moving, so we can now put those back in the locomotive. Alright, so we'll begin putting this back together. First of all, get these two pieces through. Got that backwards. each of the worm gears, put the littlest amount of oil on each of the bearings. And then obviously install them. Now for this part of the locomotive, we're going to be mixing grease and oil. So we'll put a drop of grease, and then we'll put kind of 2 parts, it's 1 part grease, 2 parts oil. I find is a pretty good mixture for most locomotives. If it's an old locomotive, increase the amount of oil you add. And once you've got your mixture, you just put a bit of that onto the worm gear. And the reason you use grease on the worm gear instead of just pure oil is because the worm gear has a lot of friction. In my experience, almost all the friction that the motor is using, it's mostly in the worm gear. So you want to have a thicker lubricant which can handle that friction. Now that we've got our locomotive all lubricated and the trucks are turning freely, I think we should give it another test run. Okay, that made a huge difference. Let's see, yeah, she backs up a lot better. And it's not derailing in the corners. So that's a success. The commutator is pretty dirty, and honestly this is probably not the best way to clean a commutator. The best way is with oil and alcohol, but that's going to take a long time, so I'm just going to use this wire and let it naturally clean. And just like that, we've got a fully polished commutator. So now that we've got all the mechanical work, let's get to the cosmetic work. First of all, I haven't seen the shell actually attach on, and I think that's just because everything on the inside was sort of messed up. So let's see if we can get that to clip in. And that would appear to be fastened. So I guess we did that right. When putting handrails on a locomotive, always make sure that it's the handrail for the correct side. In this case, you can tell it's the correct side because this comes up for this area. If we tried to put the same handrail on the other side, it wouldn't work. Now, I've counted about 11 holes on the bottom, 1 here on the side. The one on the side is an unusual length, so we'll put that one on last. But what we want to do is basically put 11 of these little ones to fit along the side. The thing you have to be most careful about is to make sure that you've actually got it facing the right way, because if you don't, it won't work. And the way you tell if it's facing the right way is you want to have this piece sticking out the same direction as the last handrail. Alright, so after getting all the handrails on, we can install them. Alright, so I just finished installing the handrails and I think it's looking very good so far. So anyway, we're now going to install the little truck covers. And to do so, we're going to use a product from one of my favorite stores, the dollar store. There's probably a better thing to use, but whenever a truck cover on one of my Atherns comes off, I usually just use a little bit of this, and it gets the job done. Now, these are pressure fit, but adding this will just make a somewhat permanent bond to the actual set. You want to put some on, but don't put too much, obviously, otherwise you might wind up getting this stuff in the gearbox, which is not something you want because it will seize the gearbox completely. And now, last but not least. Well, folks, here it is, my fully assembled Canadian National Dash 9. I'm really happy with how this thing turned out. I mean, this thing only cost me 15 bucks, and it certainly does not look like a $15 engine now. And it might have taken a bit of labor to get it to where it is, but it's not work if you have fun doing it, and I had a lot of fun assembling this thing. One thing I did find kind of interesting, though, while going through the box, is this. I believe it's the original price tag. Somebody paid $70 for this thing when it was new, and I mean, I managed to pick it up at a show for 15 bucks, so that's pretty cool. And you can also see the name of the hobby store. I'll just focus this. I'm kind of see right there. It's Horizon Hobbies. So I wonder if that store still exists. It'd be kind of cool to know if it did and find out whenabouts it was sold. But anyways, enough said about this engine. Let's go run it. Alright, so here it is all set up on the track. Now let's give this thing some power. So, it's not the quietest engine, but it's a lot better than how it was when we first got it. And it's a pretty decent runner.